You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your PMP certification journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Scope management is at the heart of project discipline. Scope defines what is in and what is out of a project, why those boundaries matter, and how acceptance will be proven. PMI distinguishes between project scope, the work that must be done, and product scope, the features and functions of the deliverable itself. Both must be managed together. Scope anchors value because it ensures that resources are directed toward the right outcomes. When scope is uncontrolled, the schedule stretches, costs increase, and quality erodes. The project manager's stance is to pursue clarity first, anchoring decisions in a baseline or backlog that acts as a single source of truth. On the exam, this appears when ambiguous deliverables, small additions, or missing acceptance criteria create risk. Defining scope is not just an administrative exercise. It is the mechanism by which the team avoids rework, protects quality, and ensures that stakeholders receive what they asked for. If a project cannot clearly say what is inside scope and what is outside, disagreements are inevitable. Every small addition accumulates, eventually creating significant variance. Scope management gives the project manager authority to say, let's pause and analyze this change, rather than allowing goodwill-driven additions to accumulate unchecked. The exam often disguises scope creep as harmless tweaks. The correct answer usually emphasizes analyzing first, not accepting changes informally. Clear scope also makes acceptance visible. Deliverables are not complete until stakeholders can confirm they meet the agreed criteria. This shifts discussion from opinions, "I thought we were getting more," to evidence. By aligning scope with acceptance standards, the project manager transforms expectations into verifiable outcomes. PMI's philosophy is that trust grows when scope is managed transparently and acceptance is never assumed. Exam stems frequently test this through scenarios where stakeholders dispute completion. The correct option is usually the one that returns to documented acceptance criteria, not the one that relies on personal judgment or stakeholder preference. Inputs and boundaries form the foundation for defining scope. The charter and business case establish the project's purpose, expected benefits, and high-level constraints. Requirements provide more detailed descriptions of needs and expectations. Assumptions fill in gaps where certainty is missing, while constraints highlight immovable limits like budget caps, deadlines, or compliance obligations. Policies, industry standards, and external dependencies also shape scope. For example, a product that integrates with a payment gateway has scope boundaries determined partly by that gateway's interface rules. Ignoring these constraints early leads to unrealistic commitments. On the exam, correct answers emphasize identifying and documenting boundaries before defining deliverables. Stakeholder expectations and value priorities must be recorded explicitly. A common pitfall is treating scope only as a list of features without mapping those features to the value they create. For example, a reporting dashboard is not valuable because it exists, but because it helps decision-makers act faster. Traceability prevents invisible scope features that feel important to one group but are not tied to documented requirements. A good scope process includes a plan for maintaining this traceability. On the exam, PMI often tests whether you recognize the importance of documenting expectations and linking them back to business case benefits. Defining scope requires decomposition. In predictive projects, this takes the form of a work breakdown structure, or WBS. The WBS is a hierarchical, deliverable-oriented chart that breaks scope into smaller components. A WBS dictionary accompanies it, providing definitions, owners, and acceptance details for each element. In agile projects, decomposition happens through backlog refinement. Epics are split into features into user stories, until work is right-sized for delivery. Regardless of method, exclusions and boundaries must be made explicit. If something is not in scope, it must be stated, not assumed. On the exam, look for answers that emphasize visible decomposition and explicit exclusions. Decomposition must also link every piece of work to ownership and acceptance proof. Predictive teams assign work packages to responsible roles and document acceptance criteria in the WBS dictionary. Agile teams tie user stories to acceptance tests that can be demonstrated in sprint reviews. In both contexts, scope is not real until it can be owned, tested, and proven. PMI emphasizes that clarity of decomposition prevents misunderstandings and disputes. On the exam, the correct answer usually involves creating or updating the WBS backlog or dictionary rather than leaving deliverables vague. Acceptance criteria are where scope and quality intersect. Good acceptance criteria are clear, testable statements that define when a deliverable is acceptable. They are strengthened by examples and non-examples, reducing ambiguity. In Agile projects, definitions of ready and definitions of done ensure work is not started prematurely and that it meets quality expectations at completion. Non-functional requirements, such as performance, security, or usability, must be included alongside functional requirements. Acceptance criteria also require agreed evidence, test results, demonstrations, or formal sign-offs. On the exam, vague statements like meets expectations are red flags. Correct answers emphasize testable, evidence-based acceptance. The importance of acceptance criteria cannot be overstated. They protect both the team and the stakeholders by turning subjective expectations into objective proof. A deliverable that feels done may still fail if it does not meet criteria for speed, security, or usability. By aligning criteria with quality standards, the project manager ensures that scope includes not just what is delivered, but how well it performs. On the exam, stems that involve disputes about quality or completion usually resolve by returning to documented acceptance criteria or the definition of done. PMI's position is clear. Criteria must be objective, not assumed. The choice of evidence format is part of scope planning. Some deliverables require formal sign-off, such as regulatory documentation. Others may be demonstrated in a sprint review, where stakeholders visually confirm acceptance. Traceability links this evidence to requirements, ensuring there are no gaps. Without evidence, deliverables remain vulnerable to rejection. The exam often presents scenarios where the team believes the work is done, but the stakeholder disagrees. The correct action usually involves revisiting acceptance criteria and demonstrating evidence, not negotiating informally. PMI emphasizes proof over persuasion. The concept of a scope baseline versus a backlog is another area where predictive and agile diverge. In predictive projects, the scope baseline is the approved combination of the scope statement, the work breakdown structure, and the WBS dictionary. This baseline provides the anchor for change control. In Agile projects, the product backlog functions as the scope repository. Items are prioritized, refined, and accepted incrementally, with lightweight change handled through backlog policies rather than formal change requests. Both models require discipline. Whether baseline or backlog, there must be a single visible home for scope decisions. In hybrid projects, backlogs and baselines must be connected. A backlog item may correspond to a deliverable in the scope baseline, creating a traceable link between agile increments and predictive commitments. This alignment prevents contradictions, ensuring stakeholders see one integrated picture of scope. Exam stems sometimes highlight this tension. The agile team delivers features not reflected in the baseline. The correct action is to map backlog items to baseline deliverables and keep artifacts synchronized. PMI stresses that scope must be managed in one consistent home, even across mixed delivery models. Maintaining one visible repository for scope decisions avoids confusion. Teams that track scope in multiple places, emails, side documents, and informal agreements inevitably run into contradictions. By centralizing scope in either a baseline or backlog, everyone operates from the same version of truth. This also simplifies governance. When changes arise, there is one place to analyze impacts and update records. On the exam, correct answers usually emphasize consolidating scope decisions into one artifact rather than letting them live in multiple inconsistent forms. In summary, Part 1 has emphasized that scope defines the boundaries of value delivery and must be managed with discipline. Inputs such as charters, business cases, and requirements establish context. Decomposition into WBS or backlog items makes scope visible and testable. Acceptance criteria ensure deliverables are proven, not assumed. Baselines or backlogs act as single sources of truth, preventing drift. On the PMP exam, pitfalls usually involve vague deliverables, undocumented exclusions, or informal acceptance. The correct answers emphasize clarity, decomposition, testable criteria, and disciplined use of baselines or backlogs as scope anchors. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Validating scope is not the same as controlling scope, though they are closely linked. Validation means gaining formal acceptance of completed deliverables. In predictive projects, this usually takes the form of sign-offs or approvals at key milestones. In Agile, it happens in sprint reviews, where stakeholders inspect increments and confirm that acceptance criteria are met. Control, by contrast, is about monitoring variance, analyzing requests, and processing changes in scope systematically. Both are necessary. Validation ensures outputs are accepted, while control ensures that changes are disciplined. On the exam, STEMs often test whether you can distinguish between these functions. The correct answers usually involve formal acceptance in validation scenarios and governance processes in control scenarios. Recording acceptance is vital for traceability. Each deliverable must have a documented record of who accepted it, when, and under what evidence. Without this, disputes can arise later when stakeholders claim they never approved an output. Similarly, variances in scope must be logged, analyzed, and either approved or rejected formally. Agile approaches provide lightweight analogs. Sprint reviews document acceptance, while backlog refinement provides scope control. PMI emphasizes that in all environments, there must be visible artifacts showing acceptance and variance handling. On the exam, look for answers that stress documentation, not informal agreement. Tailoring scope management to the project's level of uncertainty and risk is essential. Projects with high uncertainty may require less upfront detail, with scope elaborated progressively. Low uncertainty, compliance-driven projects may demand detailed scope documentation at the start. Non-functional requirements, or NFRs, also require explicit attention. These include qualities such as data privacy, safety, usability, and performance. Too often, NFRs are forgotten until late, leading to costly rework. The correct approach is to integrate NFRs into acceptance criteria and definitions of done from the beginning. On the exam, options that ignore NFRs are almost always incorrect, especially when safety or compliance is at stake. Evidence for NFRs must be preserved alongside evidence for functional requirements. For example, a system might pass all functional tests, but still fail if it cannot process transactions fast enough. A safety-critical product may function, but be rejected if it lacks required safety certifications. PMI expects project managers to ensure NFRs are tested and evidenced in the same disciplined way as functional requirements. On the exam, STEMs that describe products failing late-stage audits or reviews are signals that NFRs were not included in scope management. The correct answer usually involves revisiting criteria and making NFRs explicit. Traceability threads are the backbone of disciplined scope management. A requirement must be traceable from its origin in the business case through design, build, test, and acceptance. This ensures no requirement is lost and no feature is built without justification. Mapping scope items to benefits clarifies why they exist and who owns them. Linking changes to their impact on requirements and acceptance criteria ensures that nothing slips in through stealth scope. On the exam, the presence of unplanned features or gold plating usually signals a failure of traceability. The correct answer emphasizes strengthening the traceability chain. Preventing orphan features is a particularly important part of traceability. Orphan features are outputs created without a clear requirement, owner, or benefit. Teams sometimes add them to delight stakeholders, but they often create integration issues, consume resources, and increase risk. PMI stresses that every scope element must be justified, linked to a requirement, and mapped to acceptance. On the exam, distractors often suggest that adding extra features is a good thing. The correct answer is to prevent gold plating and keep scope tightly linked to documented value. Let's ground this with a scenario. A sponsor casually requests to just add a field to a form. On the surface, it seems minor, but the field touches 3 different interfaces and could affect reporting, compliance, and testing. The project manager has 4 choices: add it immediately to maintain goodwill, backlog it without analysis, perform an impact analysis before deciding, or re-baseline right away. The correct course is to conduct impact analysis first, then choose whether to add it via backlog prioritization or formal change control. The result is communicated to stakeholders, and artifacts are updated. On the exam, analyze before acting is almost always the correct choice. If the same scenario played out in predictive mode, the process would involve raising a formal change request, performing structured impact analysis on scope, cost, schedule, and risk, and obtaining approval through governance. Only then would the scope baseline be updated. Agile variants would place the request in the backlog, where it would be prioritized against other work items, again with clear impact visible. The key is that in all cases, changes are not slipped in informally. PMI expects candidates to understand that casual acceptance of scope changes is a classic pitfall. Exam pitfalls around scope are predictable but dangerous. One is approving date or cost changes without analyzing the impact on scope. Another is treating float or capacity as free time to add work without approvals. A third is gold-plating delivering more than was requested or agreed. Finally, re-baselining scope to accommodate changes before analysis and approval undermines governance. On the exam, distractor answers often use tempting language like, to satisfy the sponsor quickly. The correct answer emphasizes structured analysis, governance, and communication, even when pressure is high. Gold plating deserves special attention. While adding extra value may seem positive, it creates risk because those features were not analyzed, tested, or accepted as part of requirements. They can create defects, integration issues, or compliance failures. PMI is clear. Adding scope without approval is scope creep, whether it comes from stakeholders or the project team itself. On the exam, options that involve going above and beyond without analysis are incorrect. The correct approach is to stick to the scope baseline or backlog, ensuring every feature has a documented requirement. Another pitfall is re-baselining too early. Baselines exist to provide a stable reference point for measuring variance. If they are adjusted casually, they lose meaning. PMI expects project managers to re-baseline only after impact analysis, governance approval, and communication to stakeholders. On the exam, distractor answers often jump to re-baselining as a first step. The correct answers emphasize analysis, governance, and communication before baselines shift. This preserves trust in project reporting and prevents baselines from becoming meaningless. A quick playbook can help anchor scope management. First, define boundaries clearly and visibly. Second, decompose scope into manageable elements WBS for predictive, backlog for agile, with explicit owners and acceptance proof. Third, write testable acceptance criteria and definitions of done. Fourth, choose a baseline or backlog as the home for scope decisions and keep it current. Fifth, validate scope formally through acceptance and control scope through governance policies. Finally, maintain traceability from requirements to benefits, analyzing every proposed change before acceptance. On the exam, Answers that echo this playbook align with PMI's disciplined approach. Scope management is ultimately about protecting value. Every addition, omission, or modification has ripple effects on cost, schedule, risk, and quality. By treating scope as a disciplined governance process, the project manager ensures that value delivery is predictable, transparent, and accountable. Scope becomes not just a list of deliverables, but a contract between the project and the organization, defining what benefits will be delivered and how they will be proven. On the exam, the strongest answers consistently stress transparency, analysis, and traceability as the foundation for scope management. In conclusion, validation, control, tailoring, traceability, and disciplined change management. Together with Part 1, this forms a complete picture. Scope is defined through decomposition, proven with acceptance criteria, anchored in baselines or backlogs, and protected through governance. Exam pitfalls like casual additions, early rebaselining, or gold plating must be avoided. The correct choices consistently involve analysis before action, alignment to documented requirements, and disciplined communication. PMI's philosophy is clear. Scope management is not about pleasing every request, but about delivering agreed value with integrity and evidence. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.